Hmm. Yo, Sneaks.
Yo.
We got somebody pretty special today for the podcast.
Really? I thought we were like scraping the bottom of the barrel here, like last minute, you know?
I see how it is. That's how this whole podcast is going to go.
Well, no, but on a serious note, we are joined by CMC. Obviously, I'm Sneakers. We've got Crayola here as well. Say hi, Crayola.
And I'm CMC.
Yeah.
Oh, and I totally ruined it already.
It's all good. We're a budget podcast. It's not about editing, and the professionalism can get thrown out the window. We're more about the discussion.
Yes.
But yeah, how are you doing, CMC?
Doing well. Thanks for inviting me. I'm actually pretty excited to be here. Definitely listened to some of the previous podcasts that you guys have done. So
I feel honored now.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. Well, we've reached out to the community. It's been fun. There's been some real good questions thrown out. We've got quite a few responses, as kind of expected. And it's nice to sort of have a dev come onto the show. And I know personally, I love having developer interaction with any game I play. It is brilliant. It gives an opportunity for us to even just talk about the game that we love with the people who made it, which is great.
Yeah, and a very good way that you put it, Sneaks, is like hearing something straight from the horse's mouth.
Yes,
that's a good feeling, right?
Yeah. There's
so
obviously
hopefully we'll get some good topics covered tonight with some good questions, and like maybe as CMC you could start by just telling us like how long have you been at Arenanet? What's your role?
So I started at Arenanet in 2016, middle of 2016. I joined the company as QA, but I was on the competitive team as the QA at the time. And I worked in QA for about three and a half years or so. Is that right? 3 years about.
So what's
close
QA?
to that?
What's QA?
Sorry, quality assurance.
Okay.
Testing the game. And then eventually I had the opportunity to. NP was moving up to design manager, and we were trying to fill his position, and I had the chance to apply, and somehow I managed to land it. And so now I've been working as game designer on competitive for about a year now.
Brilliant. That's one of the reasons we got you on the show. So as a game designer, what is that? As you said, competitive. Is that pretty much strictly PvP that you work on, or do you work on other things?
So also World v World, and I guess I say competitive is like kind of I'm more the main point of contact there, but I am part of like the greater systems team, which is kind of a wider cast umbrella. We do a lot of stuff. It involves scales of balance, obviously. The competitive modes both fall into that. Also stuff like creature design and encounters is under the systems umbrella. So we kind of have our hands in a lot of different things, but I'm definitely more involved with competitive, so PvP and World versus World.
The cool game mods, obviously. Yeah. Right.
Definitely.
Yeah. So out of everything, you've kind of had a finger in. You said your fingers in a lot of pies. What has been your favorite content that you've kind of worked on, or maybe basically your favorite content, whether that's making an encounter or just balance or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's always got to be balance. Like, it's pretty exciting to have the opportunity to mostly be in charge of skill splits. So, like, all the numbers changes. I'm kind of like the main driver for competitive modes in that sense. And I obviously get to like consult and propose and discuss balance as a whole. And when we discuss game-wide changes, always involved in that, propose my own game-wide changes. But skill splits, stuff that's very easy, doesn't impact the rest of the game. That's very much my domain, and the February update was kind of the first major splash, and we've done a little bit of work, probably not as much as people would have liked to see since then, but we have made, a little bit of improvements since then.
I actually have an intermediate question right here. You just said probably not as much as people would like to see. Could you retort a little bit?
No, I'm kind of serious. Like, obviously, I mean, even just from the last explicitly shipped. What was it, last week? The week before? It was like 2.5 months before that patch. So it's kind of disappointing, honestly, to wait for that amount of time and then see that patch as the result, I think. And looking back, it would have been nice to maybe swing a little harder. Obviously, like since February, we've been trying to get in and do a handful of changes every month to 6 weeks, and we have hit that pretty well. A lot of the patches have ended up being pretty small. Some of them are even like 2 or 3 changes, but they're generally changes that have some amount of impact, if not as much impact as we would always like to see. But obviously, there was a much longer kind of drought between the one at the end of July and the one most recently.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I totally understand like the idea that people just want to see more balance, and when we ship something that doesn't necessarily have as much impact as we would have liked, it's obviously disappointing.
Yeah, we've got we'll come on to sort of balance and that sort of thing later on. We've got there's that's probably the main chunk of where the community questions were, as understandable.
As to be expected. Like,
exactly.
I did kind of gloss over, but before I joined Arenanet, I was very much a Guild Wars 2 PvP player, and like I've made my rounds. I missed WTS by 1 match that I'll be salty about for all eternity. But I've kind of played the game at like all levels, starting as a more casual player, getting into the ranked, getting into competitive. So I definitely understand the player side of how balance goes and what people want to see, and the disappointment that comes with pretty much every balance update. Even when the changes are good, then there's it's never perfect, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about this more when we talk about balance specifically. But I'm very well versed in being a competitive player in a PvP game and watching balance happen.
That's a good question. We have following. Like, what's your favorite class in Guild Wars 2?
Favorite class is probably Ellie. I don't play Ellie as much anymore. Like, I'm probably more of a warrior main at this point, but Ellie's always going to be my favorite class.
Are you rocking the heel breaker right now?
No heel breaker. I'm more just like strength warrior. It's not good. I mean, I think it's pretty close.
I think it's good.
From conversations I've had, it's pretty. It's not like top tier competitive, but like you can still play strength spellbreaker and not feel like an idiot in ranked.
My argument is that it's probably one of the most it's not busted, but it's not bad. It's sort of in that funny spot, if you know what I mean. It's just outclassed. It's not bad.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the tactics variant with Core Warrior too. That was a little bit more popular before the February update.
Okay.
Getting like the leg specialist value.
So
on top of like, I mean, I mostly play Warrior. I played a lot of Berserker during Heart of Thorns. I did play Tempest in Heart of Thorns too. And then Path of Fire, I pretty much played Spellbreaker for the most part. And I played Weaver a little bit. But so Ellie's my favorite class, but I mostly play Warrior these days.
Yeah, that's is that just because Ellie's not? Well, I suppose Tempest is good, but I suppose Weaver's like in a weird spot. But
yeah, I mean Tempest is fine. I was big on Dagger Ellie, like back in the core days. It was definitely overtuned at certain points in its history, but it was just like the most fun kit that I ever got to play with. So
bit before my time.
Sometimes I dream of playing Dagger Ellie again.
Just change those numbers to benefit you.
I definitely don't do that.
No.
Unfortunately. But...
Yeah, well, that just shows if you're playing Warrior and Ellie. But I think I've got sort of. We talked that you've played a bit of competitive in a lot of the games. What would be your perfect solo queue team comp? Like roles wise, like what would you go? I want that role. Because obviously matchmaking mixes things up and makes things interesting sometimes. But what would be your perfect solo queue comp? Because that is one of the community questions. Where was it at? It was actually asked by Anecdotic Shadow. So he was like, "What mixture of roles in a team would be your ideal view of what a solo queue team should look like?"
Firstly, do you play ranked?
Yeah, I do play. I don't get to play as much as I used to, but I do still play the game. So ranked is definitely. I don't really play the TDM mini seasons as much, but I do play during Conquest.
Do you ever play
a
team? Sorry, do you ever play like a team comp with a team?
No, I don't. I'm sure I could join up with some tryhards for tournaments, and they could carry me. But I haven't reached out really recently.
Yeah, that could. Yeah,
I prefer, honestly. I watch tournaments a lot more than I would play in them these days, just to see what people are doing.
Yeah, I'm going to bring you back. So, what would be your perfect sort of? So, answering that question, what mixture of roles in a team would be your ideal view of what a solo queue team should look like? I think it's sort of that's going to be more of a PvP content sort of related question, but I think it's a personal one as well. Like, what's your ideal comp as well?
So, solo queue, I think, is pretty different from like high tier competitive, just in terms of like how the games play. And I think when it comes to a solo queue comp, I actually want just a pile of bruisers. Like, give me the hollows, give me the honestly, like Weaver, like side noters are pretty good. Things that you can just do things by themselves. Like in general, like competitive, you want the pure support character to kind of carry your team fights, but it's a lot harder to have good coordination in just ranked. And so while the support characters are still strong, you're getting a little bit less value out of trying to just dominate team fights instead of just like having a pile of bruisers that can kind of roam around, fight the small fights, and just team fight pretty well, if not being optimal because you don't have the true support of, say, a Tempest or a Shoutbreaker or that type of thing. And then I think Thief is obviously super good in more organized play, but it does fall off a little bit in terms of ranked because it's harder to set up your +1s coming. You know, like you can see the Thief coming, but you're not really communicating, okay, this guy doesn't have any cooldowns, so just come in, you'll one-shot him. So less high on Thief in terms of being on my solo queue team, but I mean, you can pretty much make anything work, honestly.
I feel personally attacked by that you don't want a Thief on your team.
I mean, I'm fine with having a strong Thief player on my team. I just, like I said, it's a little bit harder to maximize the value of that role.
Yeah, so you basically you would think in solo queue, the bruisers just if you could do a little bit of everything, that's sort of the best way to go. Would you say? Well, probably. In fact, I'm going to ask that a little bit later because I think there's a question sort of related to it. But yeah, so bruisers is probably your best lineup, and you're like, yes, I've got five
Just
hollows.
Give me 5 bruisers. It's hollows. Like back in the day when people would like non-ironically play 5 DD Celielias as their comp, and it's like, yeah, this is a good comp. It's all bruisers all the time.
But well, while we've got you here on the podcast, there was a sort of topic that we thought would be a really, really interesting one. Like Crayola said at the start of the
games development.
Yeah, games development. Because there's only things that only you can answer. Like me and Crayola and people on the forums and everywhere can moan about basically balance all day, every day.
Okay, so we got one from Elisex straight away.
Yeah,
which I think is a great question. We were talking about this with Sneaks as well, and we wonder. So, his question reads: what goes into creation of a map design? Basically, how a PvP map is created, what kind of development process is behind it. So, having insight on that topic, especially thoughts behind designing them. What separates a good one from a great PvP map and such things?
Sure, I'd say at this point, what really spawns, and I wasn't involved with like the development of the original PvP maps, so I'm more speaking to like recent stuff like Coliseum or Capricorn. Was those maps were like as I was kind of joining up with the dev team. So I'd say it really starts with just like what's an interesting secondary mechanic that we can do, because we don't want to just make another clone of any existing mechanic. We want to do something unique. If we're going to make a new map, it needs to be something cool. It needs to be something that feels interesting. And sometimes those are kind of hit or miss, like we saw with Jin's Dominion. The secondary objective it's cool, but I mean it's not necessarily as impactful as it should be. And I think we've gotten a lot of feedback about the map that it's not really the most popular map, and it's understandable. I think there's other things that go into that, and so like one of those things is the layout of where the capture points are is probably the next major point after mechanics figured out. What's the layout of the map? Do we want to do like standard forest triangle, or is it going to be more of a linear layout like Fire, where the capture points, there's not as good of a kind of side path between side nodes? And I think in general, the maps that do have a better alternate route tend to play a bit better. Like Forest is probably my favorite map, just because of the diversity in movement just around the map. Whereas Fire, you very much go side through middle, and it kind of kneecaps your ability to push like home to far.
Yeah, Fire.
So it gets a bit more easy to kind of just get stalematy or locked down. It's harder to push out when you are being beaten down on Fire.
My favorite maps are always ones with when side nodes have like lots of kiting spots. I really like that because kiting is an art. That's
definitely another big point in like how the environment is built, and this is something we talk with the environment artists a ton. They'll always start with just like a pretty basic layout, and then we want to go in and make sure, all right, how are we going to make it so that there's interesting movement options around this capture point? Because as you said, kiting is, and the movement of Guild Wars 2 is like one of the main things that differentiates it. And the difference between a good player who understands where they are going just as they move is one of the big distinguishing factors compared to players who are less well versed in all the key spots. So we definitely want to make sure that those exist. And sometimes we do a better job than others and need to maybe reevaluate if we need more or less. Sometimes there's too much line of sight opportunities, and then it feels really bad. Especially when you have like an on-point line of sight. We tried to clean up most of those. Like back, Waterfall used to be so large on Fire that you could stand behind the fence and contest the node, and that was just like really bad for gameplay.
Yeah, because that'd be horrible. I couldn't even imagine that. God,
I'm sure someone will bring up the minecart, so I'll just call it out that the minecart on mine is it's kind of a mess sometimes. Well, I mean, we do have the opportunity to obviously like go in and make adjustments as needed, but we do try to take all those things into consideration when building a new map. It's like just the general geography is important.
Do you ever make adjustments on no valid path?
So in some cases there are like legitimate or distinct decisions made that there should be a no port spot, because those are kind of another point where like having some amount of those I think feels good, and having those known spots where you can just like always get away from the thief or always get away from the rev port. We don't want them to be all over the place, but a lot of the cases where they do exist, maybe they weren't like, especially on the old maps, they may not have been built that way intentionally to begin with, but we're pretty okay with them existing, and we could go and change them, but in a lot of cases I think it creates better gameplay than removing it would at this point.
Yeah, I like having the known spots because it does create that level of, I need to get here, or I can't. The thing I quite liked after the Mistform glyph got sort of, an Ellie might run to that point to know they can guarantee the glyph or something like that. It just creates that extra level of gameplay, which I like it. But yeah, you said you had to design a step. Well, how can I put it? You had a hand. That was a word. That you said you had a hand in creating the change to Eternal Colosseum. Was that sort of a big change? Like, obviously, it went from how it was to the new kiting spots and things like that.
Yeah, so I was a little bit less involved with the design side on that. When did that actually happen? Might have been. There was like a small bit of time where I was not actually working on competitive before I became a designer. So I think I remember like the early stages of those Coliseum changes coming in. That was mostly driven by Ben P though.
Okay. But no, I thought I'd put that. I know there's so much we can get out of this with games development. I know I personally am fascinated with it. So moving on to another games development question is, the new specialization. I'm not saying the new one, like new anything, but say, what's the process of coming up with the new specializations? So when you were created like the Path of Fire ones, were you involved in any sort of like skill balancing with that, or how does it sort of how does the team at Arenanet kind of come up with, like, say, Deadeye, and then how does it end up with the final product? What's sort of the design process with that?
So in terms of elite specs, I was like just joining the company around like pretty close to when Path of Fire shipped, so it was like already late in. Let me just double check the release date. 17, is that accurate?
So you weren't involved in the development of.
So I had the opportunity to give feedback on the elite specs, but I wasn't involved with like the initial conceptualization.
Okay.
Just because I wasn't even around at the time, so I'm a bit less qualified to speak to that at this point.
Yeah.
Which kind of sucks, but
it's there.
There's definitely a lot of iteration. I mean, it's pretty similar to Balance. It's just you start with an initial concept of what is this spec, what is this character, what are we trying to bring? Because elite specializations are generally trying to create a different play style for a profession. And so figuring out, all right, what are the things that this character already does? What do the existing elite specializations already change up? And is there a new niche that needs to be filled that we can really target with the new spec? And then from that, generally, you'll have a general idea, like, all right, this is going to be a bruiser, or it's going to be a support character. And it's not that this is just 100% how the class is always going to be played, but most things will have a general direction like that. Like Firebrand was very much built as a support character, but we have seen like over the duration of Path of Fire, we have like Symbol Brand, and we have burn Firebrand, maybe not as much, but like there are alternate ways to play the character beyond what the initial design looks at.
Yeah.
Which I think is good. Like we don't want to just pigeonhole any specialization into one build, but it is usually trying to fill a certain role.
Okay. Oh, so the specs are kind of more the elite specializations. Yeah, as you said, more to they encourage. That was going to bring me on to something else.
I think it's less. It's not even necessarily like a specific archetype role, like support, and sometimes it is, but just what can we do differently for how this character is going to play is the main target of elite specializations.
Okay.
I know definitely for Angie, the target for it was to have a bruiser weapon available after core, right?
Yeah, I believe Scrapper was very much built to be that bruisery character, and then Hollowsmith feels like it was designed to be a bit of a glacier kind of DPS, and it's kind of hybridized into more of a bruiser, just based off the builds that make sense. But having access to Photon Forge is like that big heavy damage transform. That's what I would expect. I'd have to got to rope some of the skills team to come on here as well, and they can tell you, they can talk about
that'd be
design philosophy for elite specs to the end of time.
Sure. So many questions.
Do you know if maybe, or do you think if the power creep is it known in advance what the power creep is going to be, or is it expected?
I think in general, I don't think we go into design and say let's just power creep the game with these elite specs. That does end up. I mean, Path of Fire, the specs were really quite powerful compared to a lot of things that were going on, especially near the end of Heart of Thorns, where we kind of had gone in and balanced a lot. I mean, it's never the goal to just create things that are overpowered, but sometimes either the mechanic is just incredibly powerful and it's not really it's a lot more powerful than it's expected to be, and so then that blows out pretty hard. But I mean, I don't think there's ever the goal to let's just power creep the game this time, guys.
I believe completely. I don't think it would be. It would be completely vice versa to what you're trying to do, leading the game forward, right? But
I mean, really, we're trying to create more diversity with elite specializations. I would say is the goal. So creating one that is just best in slot is not going to really do that.
Going on from that, I've been watching before this podcast, I've been watching a guy on YouTube called Game Maker's Toolkit, and he talks about game design and things like that. And one of the things he always says is developers have to sort of try and encourage players to play a certain way. And one thing say we were talking about power creep before, is that sort of going, oh, this is going to be good? This, like, when you're making these skills, is that sort of like an encouragement to sort of, hey, play this new class, like subliminally? But is there a sort of play style that game developers, like you guys at Arena, that you go, we want to sort of get people to play like this? So yeah, is that basically, do you guys have an idea on how people should play the game?
I mean, I think there are probably some predictions. I mean, anytime that we do balance or work on, I mean, I guess balance, because I haven't shipped any elite specs, but we do try to kind of look ahead, and it's always going to be under the assumption that we can only be so accurate internally, and even if we had an incredibly large testing team that could like just test matchups all day and play the game for hours and hours and hours for every balance patch, it would still kind of be dwarfed by the first week on live just because of the number of players. So yeah, we definitely do consider things, and sometimes we're just going to be way off the mark. In general, I do think whether with elite specializations or functional changes to balance, I think it's useful to maybe shoot a little bit higher, not with the goal of just being way overpowered, but making new things stronger just to make people look at them. Like if I'm working on something new and I'm like, all right, I want to make this a little bit, I want my perception to be that maybe that this is a little bit stronger than I want it to be, just so the more people will try it out, we'll get more eyes, we'll get more data, and we'll be able to make a better analysis going forward. Okay. Because if you ship something and it's bad and then no one plays it, then I mean, it's probably pretty bad if no one's playing it, but is it really as bad as people suspect because they gave up on it after a couple days because it's just not competitive?
Yeah.
That's all. You basically answered the question there.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of follow-up question in regards to the sort of game modes in PvP. Let's say Conquest. But is there a kind of playstyle that you kind of encourage, or because it kind of seems like a free-for-all sometimes? There's no sort of direction on how to play style, how you should play the game, sort of rotations and things like that. Is that intended by design? Or
yeah, I mean, I don't think we try to force any particular playstyle. We do consider a lot kind of the different styles that have appeared over the years. Like we have seen states of the game where people are really focused on team fighting. You have like your 4v4 team fight and your one side noter. Sometimes we've seen the more bruiser heavy meta where people will fight 2v2s, 3v3s a lot, and a lot of more rotations. And I think it's good for the perfect ideal is that all of these things are very competitive with each other. It's like I can play the pure support team fighting comp, and my opponent can play the more roamery bruiser comp, and both of these things should be viable. And you know, maybe there's some other ideas that haven't really been explored as much. I mean, I think those two are kind of the main archetypes that are going to exist based off the mode Conquest. But people are always trying new stuff, and like way back at the start of the game, people thought that your side noter should stand on your home point all game, and you were making a mistake. Like I remember watching, it was like Team Paradigm always played like Spirit Ranger. Well, this is before Spirit Ranger even, but Ranger was like one of the key side noters, and the Ranger player would always run from home point to like behind middle on Forest, you'd put it behind Keep, or underneath Clock Tower on Kylo, drop your Elite Spirit, and then run back to your home point, because that was considered like the optimal strategy, which players today looking back on it is just absurd, right? Like, why would you just have someone AFK on the map when they could be doing something else?
Yeah.
So there's always room for like the game to evolve more and more, and so there could be different styles that haven't been explored as much. And
I like I'm going to refer back to my old Guild Wars 1 days, because as you mentioned, it's nice to have variety. And in the tournaments that used to happen, you'd have like split builds, you'd have like pressure builds where either they're condis or hex or a mixture. You'd have spike builds, and there'd all be different variants of these builds. I like seeing that. I think at the moment when it goes into a meta, it's very much one is sort of more viable than the other. I don't know. Would sort of roles, because there's difference, as you said before, between 80s and ranked like solo and duo queue. Would there be sort of an encouragement? I don't know, maybe a nudge by Arenanet to sort of go, here, play like this in ranked. It might help you a little bit. I don't know how you could do that though, from a development point of view.
I mean, kind of like I said, we don't want to really enforce any style being the optimal way to play the game, and it's just more creating options and giving players tools to play with is always going to be the main goal, and then players are going to really hammer in and figure out the meta and figure out how can we attack this meta, or is this meta just kind of like the best thing ever and we can't really do anything about it, which is problematic because at that point we have not created enough diversity for the meta to kind of adapt around itself.
Okay.
But the end goal is always going to be giving as many different options as possible.
Interesting.
I love the 2 minutes. Sorry, yeah. I really enjoy the philosophy actually, because I mean, anyway, since we've been talking on these podcasts, a lot of players have so much ideas on how to improve the game, and a lot of them kind of confine what I think is Arenanet, as you're saying, probably going for allowing basically diversity to just run free, right? You're not even trying to. You even removed all the like rating, like seeing what the enemies and your teammates' rating is in the matches and stuff like this. You're really trying to push everything kind of goes, right? So, I mean, I really like that philosophy in the game. I think it's perfect for a game like Guild Wars 2, especially in 5v5 Conquest, where you see like good teams practicing different builds and getting each other's upper hand with these crafts.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'll call out, I mean, I may be jumping into balance, but Nade Hollow, it's kind of like everyone's boogeyman at this point. It wasn't even a thing until rank 55 showed up to Moda with Nade Hollow and wrecked everybody. Like, it was not really played in ranked, and most people were still playing like Elixir Gun on Hollowsmith for that tournament, and I know some people tried to like
imitate it.
Some of the teams ended up trying to mirror that Nade Hollow within Moda, but it was very much a new thing.
Yeah.
That even over the course of like 4 months since the patch, it was like the first sighting, and then everyone's like, "Oh, this is actually insane. Let's all play this." So like seeing that, even if it ends up being okay, now we have Nade Hollow to deal with him, we haven't really brought it in line as much as it needs to be. It's like it's really cool to see the point in time where here's a new thing that just popped up, and it's actually really awesome. Well, that's like, okay.
Another one
that is
going on. Another one was how Core Guard was so sort of annoying on the side node, and then Worms came along with some French technology and threw in sort of nade that not the nade. What am I about? The mine decap scrapper. That build.
Yeah.
Oh, but I liked how it's even come quite late. But I'm not even going to talk about that.
I mean, decap scrapper came in pretty. Honestly, like Shoutbreaker is more of a more recent development as well.
It's fun. So
I really like Shoutbreaker.
Yeah, it's really cool. I like the design of it.
So it's always cool to see the new stuff pop up, and like we want to get the game into a point where that just happens more frequently. Yeah, I think there's a long way to go, and that's obviously like the long-term dream is like, okay, go find some crazy builds because there's probably something you haven't seen yet. But that is like the end dream.
It used to happen in Guild Wars 1 because there's like 1,200 skills I think in that game. Yeah. Quite regularly you'd see like some team would bring. I remember it was Rebel Rising, and they did something called Raw Spike, where even their backline. This is going back old school now. Christ, showing how long I've been playing Guild Wars. I remember, like, usually you'd only have 5 people doing the spike, which is your front line and mid line. They even had the back line with like a little bit of only a couple of damage skills thrown in there, so they'd all have all 8 people were doing it, and everyone was like, "What is this?" I like that. I like how the meta can shift by just players. It's cool.
Yep. It's awesome.
Something you mentioned earlier with testing games and that you're testing teams. Because I used to play Destiny, they used to test it and then they'd go put it out to the live content or the live community, they would finish the entire thing in like 30 minutes community-wise, right? And then I've just been playing Overwatch over the last few days as well, and they've got a PTR, which is playtest. Would there ever be a way to sort of get the community involved with that sort of testing of balances and things? I don't know if that would ever be such a thing, but
I can't really go too deep into details here, but PTR is something that we discuss internally a lot as to whether or not it is, how feasible it is, and like the amount of work that's going to be, and is it going to be a payoff. I don't want to talk too much about like that whole process. Obviously, there isn't one right now.
But it has been talked about. But that's quite cool because I did like it.
It comes up like it's always a question of like, is it valuable to get players involved earlier, or is live always going to be the point in time where everyone hops on and here's where the real hammering starts.
Okay,
and I think there's arguments for both.
Yeah, because like, it's more.
There's obviously value in having a PTR, but there's also
a lot more work on your part.
I mean, it's not even just the work, but like the amount of incentivizing players to play there. Like, only a small subset of people are going to be interested in playing on the test server compared to losing out on what they're going to be getting on live. So like, it's a conversation that goes pretty deep.
Yeah, because that's the problem Overwatch had for years. People just weren't playing the PTR.
Yeah, so it valuable, but lots of things that surround it.
Going on, this is going to be Krill. Krill's been like chomping
before
at
we
the
get
mic.
to balance,
I
think a very good subject would be communication.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Leading on from the community involvement, now Krill has been chomping at the bit for this bit.
Well, I've been chomping at this for years from my personal experience, actually. Just as a player, I've kind of I've never been able to locate enough information about the game regarding balance and when is the change coming regarding balance and stuff. Just basic frustration of the PvP community that's been going on for years, basically. So maybe a bit of a daring question, but I'd just really like to ask you how much you know on this. Like, what's the process between Arenanet trying to communicate with the player base on how and why they are implementing different changes in the PvP and when, and if not in a certain time period that was maybe requested by the player base because something being maybe too broken or whatever the case, why does it feel like there's no communication from Arenanet or whoever should be talking to the player base regarding these things?
Yeah, communication, I think it's super important. So I kind of have two things to say here. One is kind of like the ideal of how communication should be, and then why it isn't that way, because as you said, it's kind of very poor in terms of like how balance is communicated right now. And way back in February when we were kind of planning this patch, the February update, I had like this long spiel on the forums about how we were going to get it was kind of talking about the ideal communication case where we were going to get notes posted way ahead of time, and then we were going to get community feedback, and we were going to have time to action things, and then we were going to get notes up ahead of time. And that happened for like February update, and then the follow-up update where we did a couple of changes to Soul Beast damage was one of the main pain points. I wrote up kind of a long spiel on the forums about, here are the changes that are being made, here are the changes that we considered. This is why we did this change over this change, because there were kind of a handful of different ways that could have taken to deal with that. And that's really, and then since then it's fallen off very heavily, and I can get into that a little bit right after this. In terms of like the ideal level of communication, I think it is very much that every change should, every change does have a reason behind it. It should be absolutely communicated explicitly to the players. And I would love to do and this is something that I'm working on improving, literally like as of right now. But being able to have that communication and that line of, here's the forum post of, here's all the changes, here's the exact reason why this change happened, this change happened, this change happened. Maybe there are some comments about other things that have not happened. Here's why they have not happened. Because at the end of the day, we do consider lots and lots of things that are invisible because there's just not called out, which sucks. Like, it's just way better if everyone knows, everyone's on the same page, everyone understands like where we're coming from, and like having a better understanding of why the changes were made. Then you can kind of look to see, okay, that reasoning makes sense. Oh, maybe this reasoning doesn't make sense, and then having that kind of back and forth is super valuable. The reason that has not happened recently being basically since April, I want to say, is that basically all the balance changes since kind of these intermediate patches, like we had the regular balance update at the beginning of July, but all of these kind of one-off patches that we've been pushing out to do a little bit of tuning of the goal is to bring down overperforming builds for the most part. These have all ended up coming in like pretty hot because obviously there's a lot of stuff going on with expansion right now, so there isn't as much time. This is the super feels bad excuse that it's not really an excuse, it's just how it is. So I'm not trying to like say that we're doing a perfect job with the amount of time being spent with anything, but just kind of the reality of the situation where there isn't as much time to do a full balance process. And so we end up scrambling pretty late in the process late in the release process to get some changes in. And I'll just take the opportunity to like look at some feedback, look at some data over the course of like 1 or 2 days, put a handful of changes together that hopefully is impactful. We don't always get there. Some of them have been better than others. And then just kind of like sneak those into the next release as much as we can. And luckily, QA team at Arenanet is super awesome. I say this because I was both a part of it and now work closely with it. They humor me in terms of getting changes in later than they should be. So we do kind of scramble at the last minute, put in a bunch of stuff, and then it goes live, and then it's back to working on other stuff that is kind of more prioritized at this moment. And so in that kind of mini balance cycle, the first thing that gets dropped is communication, because there's already not enough time to do kind of the full update that maybe everyone's looking for. But we still want to get changes out. It's important to, and I think honestly the changes that have gone out have been beneficial, whether or not they've hit hard enough each individual patch. I think they are good changes, and that's generally the feedback that I've seen from a lot of players, is that the direction is pretty solid, but to maybe swing a little bit harder next time and a little bit more often. So we kind of scramble at the last minute to kind of get these interim patches out, and then what ends up happening is there's no time to write the forum post. So it's not great, and it's something that I'm trying to find more time to do moving forward, and making sure that we do have that more direct communication. And it's just going to be a work in progress going forward.
Okay.
So that was a very long-winded, rambling response, which anyone who's listened to me talk on whatever, whether it's now this podcast or on like Tea Time or on streams, I definitely ramble a lot. So feel free to cut me off at any point. I'll just ramble as long as I ramble.
I think it's perfect. Thank you very much for rambling. In that respect, I get what you're saying. I think everybody listening does as well. Kind of a follow-up question to that would of course be, how could that be helped, whether from Arenanet's side or the community, or outside of Arenanet's perspective?
I think it's really it's mostly on myself at this point to make sure that the time is being found to have that communication in addition to the changes that are being made.
So
I don't know if there's really anything that the community needs to do other than keep harassing me when it doesn't happen, but hopefully it starts happening more. But like, it's not that I forget about it, so I guess harassing me more won't really help. But it, like, I totally understand. Like, it's the goal. It's the goal that needs to happen. So I just need to find the time. It just needs to happen.
I've got to ask, because on the forums or even on Reddit, seeing developer interaction, it's pretty scarce. Like, even just going like on, say, someone doing like one of the big long, sort of, I would say mini rants. Route, yeah, I'm gonna go for rant / critique of, say, Nade Hollow. It'd be quite nice just to see a developer be like, yeah, we've got our eyes on it. We are doing some internal, just something like that. I think having a bit more, because there's no official sources. Say the forums, it's where you're meant to go if people don't know. They don't know about the certain discords, like the Welcome to PvP Discord. For the average player, I think they're the ones feeling left out. So at the top level PvPers, they have they can sometimes have a say. It's the middle, like the lower rank and the average ranked players. I think they're feeling a little bit left out. That's sort of the problem, which I've been seeing a lot on the forums, and that was one of the big community concerns at the moment.
So I can say that there's obviously less outgoing communication in terms of like the forums, but we do read the forums a lot. Finding the time to reply, like as I've unfortunately lamented about already, is just like the amount of time available is not necessarily enough to do all of the communication that I would like to. Even like, I would say that as time exists, the first time will go to creating the forum post for any balance updates and the explanations there, and then as more time exists, getting on the forums. Like I used to post on the forums more a long time ago, before things started ramping up a lot. But I do think that communication is also important. It just in terms of priorities, it does end up falling underneath other things, so it doesn't happen as much as we would like to.
Okay. So what's the main channel?
We do read the forums. It's just the back and forth communication does not get as much exercise as maybe it should.
Okay, so what's the main channel for this communication?
For what communication?
Players and developers, more specific, you.
Yeah, so forums are kind of the safest bet. Like, if you post on the forums in the PvP section, I will probably read it at some point. Whether or not I have time to respond, kind of just touched on that. But I do try to read a lot, as much as possible, just because I like having more data about everything. If you have me on Discord, like, you know me through Welcome to PvP Discord, or the other Guild Wars 2 PvP Discord, or the WoWo Discord, or whatever, you got my Discord from someone else, you can definitely reach out to me, and this is a lot more hit or miss as to time I have to reply to things on Discord, which I'm sure many people listening to this will relate to, because I do have messages in Discord that I have not a chance to respond to literally at this moment. But I do get to them eventually. It's just things are crazy.
To put it in perspective, we didn't even get a response for probably about a week when we reached out to you. So yeah,
so like, I totally get that it feels bad, and like, I feel bad that I don't respond to everyone immediately, or even in a what you might think is a reasonable time frame. But I do get to everything eventually. I think that's accurate. I'm sure I've missed something over the months or whatever.
What you said earlier,
if you ping me on Discord, I will see it at some point, and I will try to respond.
What you said earlier about implementing after the February change and the communication, I was actually a part of it back then, and I wasn't on Discords or anything, and I was seeing more communication. So I'm hoping, yeah, definitely, if that comes back.
Yeah, around the February update, it was, I mean, pretty shortly after that other things started really taking up a lot of time. But like, as you said, I think it was pretty good back then. And it's just getting back to that.
I'd quite like to see.
It's one of my personal goals for sure.
I'd quite like to see some PvP Twitch streams, because it's always, that's the one thing. I remember on Destiny, you could put put this idea forward, CMC. They did something called Bungie Bounty, where they would get developers to play in like just unranked or whatever, just going into the PvP, and players who beat the devs got a special like emblem or a title or something like that. That could be quite an interesting.
Yes, I mean we do have the achievement you get that doesn't. I mean it doesn't give you achievement points. But
I'd like a title I can
there's
brag.
an achievement if you kill somebody.
I want the
Or
bragging
kill an
rates. Yeah, that's what I want.
I mean, so we do have like the WoWa stream that happens most weeks, except not recently because people have been kind of busy. We've talked about doing a similar thing for PvP. It's just finding the right time, finding the right people. I mean, I'd probably be involved. Maybe we can sucker Ben P into getting involved. Even though he's
he would definitely be
kind of all over the place. Yeah, I mean, it's something we've talked about a lot. It's just we talk about a lot of things.
Yeah,
I mean, we'll surely encourage it and take part of.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy streaming. I used to stream Guild Wars 2 when I was a player. Like my stream was okay, pretty mediocre, good music, good chat covers, and questionable gameplay, but it was always fun. So like I like interacting with, whether it's just chat or the community. I mean, I like interacting with the community, which hopefully that sounds believable because it's actually true.
Yeah, well, it's expected because when you were saying you're limited on time and things like that, you got to think on how many people play the game, and then if they're all going to reach out on you, there's only so many hours in the day. Yeah,
but like coming on doing stuff like this podcast, I was really excited too, just because it's an opportunity to just get involved with people who are super passionate about Guild Wars 2, which is that's the type of person that I am. That's why I'm in the position I am today, is because I'm someone who is super passionate about Guild Wars 2 PvP. So it's always fun to get involved with people who have a similar mindset.
Yes, we do. We love Guild Wars 2 PvP. I mean, it's my favorite game, most definitely by a long stretch from any other one.
It's definitely still my favorite PvP game of anything. Like, I think the combat system is just kind of unmatched.
Unmatched completely.
Yeah, it took me a while to get used to jump because I was just like, I'm playing Guild Wars 1 for its entire lifespan. Came over to Guild Wars 2 and was like, what is this garbage? And then eventually, I weaned myself onto it. And then it was like, because I'm always a PvP player, and then was like, oh, actually, this is pretty good. But yeah,
it's
untouchable. Yeah, out of all MMOs, I think I've never heard anyone go, oh, the combat system in this game is lackluster. It's always the best. That's one thing I do love, and PvP is always going to be the best thing. I think that's a good segue onto the next topic, Krill, unless you've got more you want to ask on.
I think communication is my favorite topic.
Okay.
This is I'd just like to say this is the reason why we're doing this anyway. Podcast. Communication. So having you here, talking like this, pure joy. So I'm really excited to step onto balance. It's all about balance anyway, whatever you're dealing with. So
yeah, in fact, I've got the one more question as well, because we talked about sort of the communication between dev and the players, and you were saying it's just a time issue. I don't know. It's at the moment. It's always someone hears about a balance change from some guy who saw whose friend was in a Twitch stream chat where you maybe commented on something. That's how balance sort of changes get leaked at the moment. Like I don't know who runs the blog post and things like that, but would it be within reason to ask for even just a simple discussion of what's being talked about, even once a month or something like that, just so then there's that sort of, I know it's a big ask, but it's definitely something which I'd think would be a big hit, even if it was like a paragraph on the end. We're aware of Neololo.
Yeah. That is something that is on my list of things I want to do. I would love to have just like kind of a sticky post on the forums. It's like, not necessarily like roadmap is not really the correct term, but like here's the state of balance from my point of view. Like these are the things that we're looking at as overperforming. These are the things that we're looking at as underperforming. These are things that are more likely to get actioned faster. These are some things that we're kind of doing on the back burner, and then updating that like as more information comes in and as changes get made. Sounds awesome. I would love to do it.
Yes.
It's something that I am absolutely
It's one
looking
thing.
into.
It's one thing that, because I used to play Destiny, and Bungie had the This Week at Bungie blog post every week, and there'd be weeks without a PvP talk as expected in games, but it was just nice because they'd be like, okay, and here is the balance team to tell you, and it would just get like some. It'd be like, this is what we're doing, this is what's on the cards, we know this is doing overperforming, and just that, I think having some sort of news within the community is better than radio silence at the moment, which seems to be that's the problem.
I mean, radio silence is definitely the worst case, and I definitely understand that.
But segue time onto probably the big chunk of what the community was asking about. It's all balance.
Yeah, the 50% chunk.
Yeah, easy. Most everyone had a question, whether it's on their specific class, a specific skill. I'm gonna disclaimer everybody: we're not asking about a specific skill or a specific trait. We want to get more of a topic of conversation. We may ask a one or two, which we thought were quite specific and funny. But yeah, there's a lot of questions.
All right, looking forward to it.
Right, I'm going to start right at the top. So, what from a balance sort of decision and how it goes from this needs patched. How do you decide what needs balanced, and how do you go about change? Like, do you get data? What's got the process and go about changing things?
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with data, which is made up of many different things. We have statistics internally about like match data and how professions are performing within ranked or tournaments or any particular queue that's broken out. Like our analytics team is fantastic. We have like per build, you can see like this is how this build performs in ranked over this time period. So that's something that I like to look at more of like as a just to see like how things are. It's not necessarily what we use to action things, because I've talked about this before, like in the past, where if all we did was make balance adjustments based off of win rate statistics, then we would nerf Dragon Hunter every patch. And it is still something that performs quite well.
Can confirm.
The last season, like Trap DH,
can confirm.
Pretty high win rate at even high MMR and ranked. So it's more of like that. The raw data is more for getting some baseline. All right, kind of feeling out what's actually going on, but having like a deeper understanding beyond that is super important. And I have a lot of that from like my time playing this game a lot, and then gathering data from player feedback is kind of the other main component that goes into things. And some of this is from reading the forums, some of this is from people pinging me on Discord. Sometimes we'll sit down with like a handful of players, just have like a super long discussion about what's the state of the meta right now, what sucks, what's overperforming, what are the general thoughts about what should be changed. Like that is very specific feedback that I do gather. And then at the end of the day, it all comes down to kind of analyzing all the data from all the sources and determining, okay, here are the things that we want to action, and then identifying whether that generally starts on a build level of, okay, nade hollows are performing, what are we going to touch on nade hollow? But sometimes it is on this trait is just a huge problem in terms of the gameplay that it creates, so it's worth doing something here. And then, but in general, we start at like the build level and then identify kind of the points that make sense, and in terms of what things should be brought down, how hard do we want to swing the nerf hammer for this update, which is usually pretty light. One of my goals with balance, and I talked about this back before the February update, is that we want these kind of intermediate updates that happen between the regular balance updates to be a little bit of a lighter touch. It is trying to just go in and tweak overperforming builds, trying to bring them a little bit back in line. We don't want to just delete something off the face of the earth. I mean, that's never the goal anyway, but sometimes we will kind of adjust things a little bit harder. And what a lot of the intermediate patches are trying to find like the one or two things per build that if we touch these, does it get people to reconsider the power level here? And something like, as an example, the change to symbol radius trait on Guardian. It doesn't really change the raw sustain coming out from Core Guard, or like Retail is something that's been called out pretty commonly as well from mostly the Zeal trait. But like the change of once the symbol radius trait goes away, this changes things enough. It makes you kind of reconsider, how do the matchups play? Like, now that I can avoid this damage, does that mean the rest of the things that are going on with this build are now less important or less relevant? Like, sure, it still has a bunch of retail, it still has good sustain, you know, pretty bulky, but maybe it doesn't matter anymore because their damage isn't as free. So trying to find like, and so that's like one of the reasons why the only chain we went with the last update is the symbol radius trait, because it is kind of the point of, if we change this, it should be pretty impactful in terms of like the gameplay impact. So it's worth doing that and then reevaluating. And that's generally the reason why we go pretty light, is it's trying to just create an opportunity to kind of reevaluate how the build plays. Does it create enough space for something else to come up in the meta and then contest that? And it's still true that a lot of the time we will kind of undershoot, and it's not necessarily. I did just say that we do go a little bit lighter, but we don't want to ship changes that don't have any impact or not enough impact, which does happen sometimes. But the main goal is to have the more regular kind of like intermediate balance updates be a bit smaller, a bit lighter, but more frequent, which obviously hasn't been the case over the last 2.5 months or so. But before that, it was pretty solid, and moving forward, hopefully it will be pretty solid again. And I hope that answered the question, because I just started rambling again.
No, it's perfect. That's what the podcast is for. Just to mention, because you said you get in a Discord call with top players. Myself and Crayola, we kind of got the privilege of getting invited to that Discord, sort of as a voice of the people almost. That's the idea. But for those listening, the conversation kind of blew me away.
Yeah,
it was really good. And I know some of the people have been asking, why are they only talking to top players? The top players actually do say this is they talked about lower ranked builds and what is problematic in there, and it is I'm just going to confirm it is a topic that did come up as well. And they go, and people, yeah, it's really good.
So I can talk about this a little bit too. Like, we talk to the top players a lot just because they tend to reach out a lot more. Like, Bloody always pings me. He's like, "Hey, we're talking about balance this weekend." I'm like, "Yeah, let's talk about balance this weekend." And so then he organizes a bunch of people to show up to a call, and like, that is not necessarily restricted to the upper echelon of players. Like, I have done a call with some of the people on the Welcome to PvP Discord before. That happened a long time ago, and it hasn't really happened again since. But I will just make this statement out to the community here that, I mean, if you want to talk about the game and just like sit here in a call with me and get a bunch of players together and talk about the game from any perspective, whether it is bronze players in ranked and you just have a group of bronze players in ranked that want to talk about the game, I love talking about Guild Wars 2, like above many things that I do in my free time. So if you have players that want to talk about Guild Wars 2, you should definitely try to organize something and reach out to me. And again, keep in mind, like we talked about earlier, I can't always respond immediately, but I do love to have organized conversations with people about the game. And I talk to top players because they harass me way more often, but there's no reason why any group of players could not have a conversation with me in a Discord call. Like, there's no restriction really.
That's so cool to hear.
Yeah, you're really open. That's really cool.
So on behalf of the community, thank you for
There you
that. That's awesome. That's actually made my day to hear that. So
I'm looking forward to just the avalanche.
Yeah.
After this podcast.
Oh, so that's
it's I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true. Like,
yeah,
I love getting involved with stuff like this and having those conversations, and it's just a matter of finding the right group. And like, what it always ends up coming down to is that I never have the opportunity to organize it myself, which ideally, in a perfect world, I would create a bunch of different conversations to have, whether one is with top players, one is with high-level ranked players, one is with XYZ groups of players, right? Like, it would be cool if I just organized everything and reached out to everybody and did all the heavy lifting myself. And again, I'll just complain that I don't have enough hours in the day to do that. So
it's up to us.
I super appreciate when the community kind of comes together and coordinates most of the work, and then I just show up and have a conversation with people. Big fan.
There you go. It's on you now. Forums. You complain enough.
Well, I think what CMC stuck about it also is just kind of structuring stuff a little bit better, because the reason why the talks maybe work, top players or like high level players that dedicate a lot to the game that do reach out know a lot about the game.
They know a lot about the game, and we usually have a plan going in as well. It's like, all right, what are we going to talk about? Generally, it's about what's overperforming and current state of the meta.
Yeah.
But we do tend to touch on a lot of. It does include stuff like what's underperforming, what doesn't exist in the meta. Like, it's really about like how long people want to talk. Because I think the most recent talk I had with the Discord group went like 4 hours. And that's cool. That's fine with me. Like, if you guys want to talk about Guild Wars 2 for 4 hours, just let's do it.
I had to leave the call. I had to leave the call because it was getting late. I was like, I want to stay.
I will just say, keep in mind that weekends are way better for me. If you're trying to organize something like this, I usually like to do it on the weekend. So
there you go.
So I do have like work to do during the week or something.
Getting back onto the topic of balance, because we sort of got derailed there, but I like it. I'm so happy about that. That's made me even more happy. So you talking about sort of statistics and getting data and things like that. What do you know what sort of classes have the best win rate, and do they kind of match up with things? So when people go, this is so broken, like this is busted, does that like sort of match up with things, or does it vary from ranked, like depending on the rank?
It definitely varies based off like rating bracket.
Mm-hmm.
Like something like Nade Hollow actually is pretty average within like the silver gold tiers, and only really starts to overperform statistically in like plat legendary tier. But even even sometimes like things that overperform in tournament meta aren't necessarily as visible in ranked. And in terms of raw win rates, it's not saying that there's not a problem in terms of the gameplay that's there. It's just that the actual win rate of these classes, I'll throw out like Renegade is like kind of a hot topic recently. There are various ways you can play Renegade, whether it's with Kala or with Chalice or both, or the Shiro build. There's a few different Renegade builds out there right now. Renegade is a little bit weaker in terms of ranked performance, but it's not to say that things don't need to change. It's just that the data is interesting, I guess, that it does vary maybe from player perception. But I think player perception is a lot driven by how the gameplay feels and how it feels to play against a certain class. And obviously balance and power level is a big component of that, but at the same time, sometimes it's like, this is just not fun to play against this mechanic.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily say that the win rate is going to be high. It's just that it's not fun to play against.
And we spoke to you before, and what's more, I know this is a pretty obvious question for a developer. What's more important, balance or fun?
I mean, it's always, honestly, it's fun. Like,
it's gotta be.
If the game is not fun, then
what's the point?
Who's gonna play it, right?
Yeah.
And I do think having good balance is fun. Like, it's a good component of fun, and it's not that you can have a horribly unbalanced game and it's going to be fun to play, because being horribly unbalanced is kind of unfun in itself, but it's not the only factor.
Yeah. And
you can have the most balanced game in the world, but it's just not fun to play, and well, that's not a success.
Okay. I'm gonna.
So what's what's like a easy or a hard thing to fix balance wise? I would imagine that maybe number changes would be very easy. implement?
Yes, so number changes are what we try to do as much as possible with numbers changes because there is zero impact on the rest of the game. Obviously, Guild Wars 2 is not just a PvP game. We do have World versus World, we do have PvE, which has a lot of different components to that as well. So if we can make good balance changes for one mode without touching anything else, that is kind of the ideal. And there's definitely cases where you've run into where maybe the best change can't be made, but there is opportunity to make good changes with numbers changes. So we try that kind of as much as possible first. And sometimes it ends up that, well, we actually can't get to the right balance we're looking for with numbers. Do we actually need to make a functional change here? Then that is a larger discussion that happens within kind of the entire skills team, because we do need to consider, how does this functional change affect PvE? How does it affect World v World? How does it affect PvP? We don't want to sacrifice something good for a particular game mode if we can avoid it. But sometimes we can't avoid it, and it's like, okay, this is good gameplay in PvE, or this is good gameplay in PvP right now, but it's too much of a problem for this other mode. We should probably do something about it. We need to find the right change. But in general, and a lot since February has been, and again going forward, like even when there are good functional changes to be made, if there is a good direction that can happen through numbers changes, that is kind of the top priority, because how it does not impact the rest of the game.
Okay. Now I suppose we've got this. We'll ask a couple of community questions. What do you reckon, Gorilla?
Yeah, most definitely.
This is a perfect opportunity. I think one which came up quite a lot, and this is for all you Mesmer players out there. What is the thoughts on like the one dodge Mirage or Mesmer? Because other than, it's not really seen, if I'm brutally honest. You still get an odd player, but it's not in a good spot to put it. What is your thoughts, and is there sort of any plans? I know it kind of briefly got talked about in the discussions with top players and things like that. But what is there anything? And it sounds daft, but you can mention about Mesmer or Mirage one dodge nerf and stuff.
So the one dodge thing on Mirage, I feel like obviously it was like a pretty heavy change. I do think at the time it was definitely the correct change. The problem that we were seeing is just that the Mirage cloak mechanic of Mesmer was kind of just too powerful in PvP, where being able to dodge while CC'd or being able to dodge while using another ability. It was just like kind of really far beyond anything else that really exists in the game ever. It's like, this is just insane. Like, I could just cover my heal, I could cover my CC'd, I could just, like, it's just so super powerful that we're like, okay, you should probably only be able to do this one time. And I think the change has ended up going pretty well. I'll throw Helseth under the bus because I'm a big fan of Helseth, and he has brought up a lot of times that he actually really likes how the change went through. Obviously, the viability hit and how Mesmer is not super viable is more of a concern, but in terms of like the power level adjustment that happened through that change, I think was pretty good. And then it's just a matter of finding the changes that bring Mirage and Mesmer as a whole kind of back up after that happened, because it felt like a necessary change, and I do think it was correct. It's just that the class kind of fell off a cliff after that because it didn't have a whole lot else going for it.
That's completely true. Like,
Yeah.
it was through the roof, the damage, right? And it's really the state it's in. I think Helseth even said in the we chatted or whatever about like it's about managing your skills a lot more right now, and maybe the heal should be buffed, right?
Yeah, the big feedback that, let's talk about Helseth some more, because I mean he's someone that I respect a lot as a Mesmer player and just a Guild Wars 2 player in general, because he's been around forever, and once upon a time I don't know, I never actually played him in a competitive setting, but we talked a lot back in the day when I was a player.
It's painful.
The main feedback is that Mesmer doesn't have any sustain right now. It's like, okay, well, I get chunked by one skill, and then my best sustain is to get out of combat and let the game heal me. And so it just can't really stand with kind of the meta classes right now. And so looking into ways to maybe bring up Mesmer Sustain a little bit makes a lot of sense. That's the main feedback point that I have on my plate right now. I think there's more room to kind of evaluate what builds is Mesmer, what roles are Mesmer supposed to be fulfilling, like what is Chrono supposed to be, what is Mirage supposed to be, is Core Mesmer supposed to be in there somewhere? How do we really make these things kind of exist where they don't?
Yeah.
And
my experience with current Mesmer, just as like just to say, like once you get them down to a certain percentage, they can't heal back up. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's
Mesmer
kind of been how Mesmer has been kind of throughout history. There was a point in time where like inspiration was a common trait line, and you did get pretty relevant healing from the heal and shatter trait. But even looking like way back in the day, Mesmer, back when people played just like in core, when you have Shatter Mesmer on your team because Portal is the best skill in the game, and honestly, Mesmer was a pretty good class. Anyway, it wasn't really a sustain class. It was always like that bursty roamery assassin type, and so it made sense that that character in particular was not maybe as well versed in sustain as something like Chrono, which is built to be a little bit tankier. But even Bunker Chrono, which ravaged through the game, that like Heart of Thorns launch, everyone I'm sure remembers Bunker Chrono.
Krail remembers it.
It did have some sustain, but it wasn't really on the level of like historic sustain classes that we see, like Water Weaver or things like this. It was a lot more of just a pile of strong defensive cooldowns. Like you had Well of Eternity, which gave you invuln, and it had like on top of distortion, on top of shield block being insane, and the stun. Like it was much more of a bulky character as opposed to a heavy sustain character, and that was a lot more useful at the time. But I think that since then, damage is kind of a bit higher, and even after the February adjustments, like the raw damage output from a lot of classes is still pretty high. So that if you don't have real sustain, it's going to be difficult to take fights just because there are so many threats. You can't mitigate everything that you need to mitigate. You are going to need some raw healing to stay in fights, and I think that's definitely something that Mesmer lacks just because it hasn't really needed that over the years before.
Yeah, something you mentioned there is trying to find a place for it. It seems at the moment, like Mesmer hasn't really got an identity or a role. I think that's sort of the problem. Thief is obviously the gatekeeper at the moment with Glob. It gets brought up a lot.
We talk about Glob every single Discord call starts with Glob.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll definitely nerf Glob. You heard it here first. I don't know when it's going to happen. I mean, the skill's just.
Oh, it's so good. It is literally the gatekeeper.
I honestly don't know how it has not been changed for, and I mean, a lot of this is on me in the last year as a designer, but like, I don't know how that skill is not.
It's just gone under
like
the
radar. Numbers are just too high, right? Just bring the numbers down, make it.
It is very much the gatekeeper, because if you got a thief, like every time I play and I see a Mesmer, I'm just like, I'm gonna bully them the whole game. It really is like that.
Yeah.
It's quite fun.
I want to read out another community question here.
Is this Holtz one?
Yeah, Holtz one. It's almost impossible to make changes to the game without someone disagreeing with it. It is almost like the PvP community is plagued by a permanent feeling of discontent. As a game developer, how do you approach this issue? Are you making balance changes to make people happy or to make the game better? Have you ever made balance changes that you guys did not agree with, but the community wanted? How do you cope with the fact that there are always some people who are unhappy with certain changes? Will be unhappy. Sorry. You get the gist.
No, I get it. At the end of the day, the goal is to make the game the best game possible, and if we reach that, I think players will be happy. So it's less about player happiness with any individual change. That's not to say that we shouldn't try to make players happy. Like, I think making good balance changes is something that makes a lot of people happy. And obviously, if your class gets nerfed or something that you dislike playing against gets buffed, it's maybe a personal dissatisfaction with that exact change. But viewing kind of the patch as a whole, or like the game as a whole, seeing the direction that we're trying to do, I think is really where we're going to try to, I guess, create happiness. Happy is a strange word to talk about in terms of balance, because as you said, and as the question referenced, players don't really agree on a lot of things, and that's not to say that anyone's right or wrong, or that certain changes are objectively correct or objectively incorrect. But even within like discussions among the top players in the game, there's a lot of back and forth of like that we don't actually need to nerf this. It's just like people need to try something else. Maybe there's a different. Maybe you're just playing the matchup incorrectly, right? Like even if the builds are correct, the matchup is not being played well, and it's very rare that people will just all sit down and be like, this is a good change. And it does happen sometimes, honestly. And in cases like that, it is usually the case that the change makes a lot of sense. And it's something that I also agree with, like from the design side. It's like, it's not surprising that if literally an entire Discord call full of players is like, yeah, this is ridiculous, it's probably ridiculous. And maybe it's not ridiculous to the level that everyone thinks it is, but it's worth evaluating for sure. And so I wouldn't say that we ever make changes specifically to make people happy. It's not like, oh, this player proposed this change, so we're going to do it because it'll make them happy. It's more of like, this player proposed a change for a reason. What's the reason? It's probably because, you know, if they're asking for a nerf, they think that this particular skill or build is overperforming. So that's more of the data point that I talked about earlier with player feedback. It's like, this gives us things to look into, and we won't necessarily make the exact change that's proposed, but there's a lot of feedback about Grenade Hollowsmith being overpowered. Then it's worth investigating what are the changes that make sense for Grenade Hollow. So from my point of view, it is absolutely, let's make the game as great as possible. That is the absolute goal. Make the game great.
Brilliant. So when you were saying, basically going on through that, an example would be, we talked about Renegade not long ago, where what kind of feedback do you like hearing as a developer? Because this is an opportunity to kind of put some emphasis on the community. What helps you out the most? Like, is it opinions? Is it just overperforming, or even suggestions? What would work that way?
I mean, a lot of people like to give suggestions, and I appreciate getting suggestions. But I will say that the most valuable thing for me is understanding the gameplay that brings you to be upset about this thing, right? Like if you are upset about Renegade, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Like, what are you playing? Are you trying to then 1v1 the matchup? Like, what within the matchup feels like it's unfair or overpowered? And what are you trying to do within your own gameplay to adapt to that? Like, how are you expecting to defeat this build and then being unable to? Like, if you have an idea of, okay, we should be able to beat Renegade in this way, whatever it is, it's more of a thought experiment, right? But it's like, I think that by taking these skills, it makes a lot of sense that my build is now more adept to fight this class, but I still can't win. And so it feels as if the problem is that my expected counterplay to this, it just doesn't exist. That's a really interesting thing to read and understand as a developer. It's like, I want to understand more where your pain points are as opposed to your proposed solution, because your proposed solution is always going to be based off your understanding of the thing and how you're playing the game. But I am more interested in understanding your understanding than I am making any particular change, because that gives me more insight into how things are going and how the game is actually being played. Because like we said before, I can only play the game so much, so getting more perspectives is always super valuable.
That's really interesting, because you just mentioned what this. So player goes up. Let's give like the dumbest matchup. So let's go Thief 1v1 against Core Guard. Boom. And you're going in. I'm going Condi Thief, and you go, why aren't I winning? Instead of going, what have I done to try to beat the Core Guard? And I feel like the matchup, or even the role reverse, something like that. So.
And sometimes it's just going to be the case that you can't win the matchup. Like that, at the end of the day, like not every build is going to be able to beat every other build, assuming everyone plays correctly. Like there's always outplay potential.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back historically, like in core days, core Condi NG versus Condi Necro was basically a 0-100 matchup, and people are going to bring up cases where they've won it. But if the Necro played correctly, you are never winning this matchup as an engineer, which sucks as an engineer player, but it wasn't necessarily pointing to a problem with Necromancer, and it was more like, well, NG Condi Cleanse is actually really terrible. Do we need to buff it? And it's not always the case that we do, right? Like,
Yeah.
there are some cases where your class is just not designed to win the matchup you are trying to fight, and that's just how it is.
My favorite phrase whenever anyone complains about going, "Oh, I should have won that," it's just like it sounds like a bad rotation to me. Just don't rotate there.
Oh, I don't want to off topic too hard, but like, what my general philosophy on like getting better at games and just competitive games in general is like, I'm always more interested to see where do I make my play better. Like if I lose because something's overtuned and I'm like, I lost. I didn't lose because the build I am fighting overtuned. It's because I made a mistake somewhere. Like my mistake is what lost the game or lost the fight. And even in like a ranked environment, if I feel like I try to put the team on my back and carry the game 1v4, 1v9, whatever you want to call it, and we lose anyway, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter winning or losing in ranked. It's more about improving at the game and identifying the weaknesses within your own game and how you're going to kind of overcome them to get better. But that's not really relevant to anything we were just talking about, so it's just...
I like it. It's
all good.
I always want to look at how I can improve myself before I can...
That's one thing we've...
evaluate anything else, right?
We've really been emphasizing that on the podcast, that just look at yourself rather than blaming the team a lot of the time.
I mean, this is just a good life tip in general. This is now a life tips from CMC podcast.
That's the second one. We had Angels on last episode talking about life tips.
Always look to improve yourself. I mean, that's my general thought on it.
Okay. So I've got another community question. This is one which we kind of spotted out and we quite liked it. So this is from Masterketsu.4569 on the forums. His one was, will Balance Team be taking a closer look at cast times and animations? And he added this. So there are many powerful skills and effects that have extremely noticeable effect on the flow of PvP matches, but have little to no tell or cast time or too quickly for anybody to sort of react to them. There are also skills like the LE skill Gale that have a large animation, but the grander part of the animation doesn't play until after it's already hit, making it pointless. It's meant to be an action combat where you sort of react. So is there any sort of plan to take a look at cast times and animations? Does that prop up?
Definitely. And we did some of this with the big update in February. There were a handful of CCs that got wind-ups because it, as pointed out, it feels really bad. Like it doesn't really fit the ideology of the game to just have something happen to you. It's supposed to be, I have the resource of dodges and defensive cooldowns, and it's like, how am I going to use these to mitigate what my opponent is throwing at me? So if you ever have something that just comes out instantly, that's a huge impact, it's a pretty big problem, honestly. And we've tried to touch these over the years, more or less here and there. It's always something that is a discussion that happens. It's like, because cast time and animation is something that we cannot split on a per game mode basis, so we do have to evaluate what needs to happen to this skill for the rest of the game. Like if we slow this down, does that affect PvE rotations? Does the skill just need more damage to compensate? Does it just need something else to compensate? Or is this really going to brick how the overall kit feels? It ends up being a very deep kind of investigation into what is going to change as a result of this. But I do think in general we would like to have all these cases of no cast time impactful skills either become less impactful or have the necessary counterplay. And some of that could be moving the animation or the cast effect earlier in the animation. Makes a lot of sense. This is something that's true with like is it Future Mark? No, Future Mark has the hand animation at the start, but Chillblains has like the green hand effect at the end of the staff cast where the mark has already landed, and it's something that I've thought about a lot over the years. Like, why isn't the green affected the front? It's still really hard to see, but it's at least an improvement, right? Because Guild Wars 2 is very much a game built around counterplay, and having options to react to what your opponent is doing is really the core of the entire combat system. So a lot of cases that don't have that, like I said, we need to investigate if it needs more counterplay or does it need to be less impactful. And sometimes it goes one way, sometimes it goes the other. Like with the overcharge shot, we gave it more counterplay with the cast time, and we actually need to go back and make it something we talked about a lot. And I'm just rambling, but why not? Is now removing the self knock on overcharge shot, because now that it has a wind up, there's not really any need to punish yourself even more heavily. That's something that's on the list of notes somewhere internally that hasn't happened in one of these intermediate updates, but something going to happen someday in the future. But then something like, say, a LE error trait that says deal damage on swap, we reduce the damage very heavily and made it apply more vulnerability, so it is less of an immediate impact. And hopefully it still feels pretty good, like it's like 8 vuln now or something. It still sets you up to deal more damage, which is the goal of the trait, but it now has more counterplay because that same strike is not chunking you for 3-4k. It is now making subsequent hits deal more damage, which hopefully have more counterplay built in. So the TLDR there is, yeah, counterplay is super important. Skills with no cast time tend to be a problem when they're too effective. We can touch them in multiple ways, and at the end of the day, we just want very impactful skills to have enough counterplay. That is just how it is. And that's not saying that that's true across the board right now, but that is a long-term goal for sure.
Awesome.
Overcharge shot. That's going to be...
Yeah, personal question. Can we get the instacast on Blinding Powder? That's what I want back.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to skill individually, but that is the case where instant cast isn't really a problem because it's just going to do an AoE blind, and I mean, instantly stealthing is quite strong. It's fair.
It is.
Blinding Powder is probably too fast to react. It's like a quarter second, right? It's not a slow cast time anyway. It's already just anyway.
But I kind of missed the question. So Crayola.
Oh yeah, we got another community question. Are you aware of well, of course, the changes to icons for auras? Like I barely noticed this, but it's the icons are completely like blue and white.
Yes.
So they all look
aware of this. Yes, I guess so. The question is, or the feedback is that it's too hard to differentiate, I imagine.
Yeah.
And we heard this a lot when those icons first changed, and I don't remember off the top of my head what ended up being the result of that conversation, but I do understand the sentiment, and I do think it is a little bit hard to differentiate them. And I will definitely poke some people about that to kind of get some thoughts internally about to see like if there's anything that we can do to kind of better differentiate. I mean they were moved to the blue and white because that's kind of the standard for beneficial buff icons, and the standard for detrimental buff icons is more of like that purple and white, I believe. So it was trying to standardize them, but I think the end result ended up being a little bit hard to see. Because I mean they are different icons, right? It's just in the heat of the moment seeing that blue on white and saying, well, which aura is that actually? It's a little difficult.
So follow up on that, because I on the same guy, so Pterodactyl on the forum 7630. I'll give the shout outs to people as well. He did have a second question, which I kind of want to know the answer to, because there's a couple of traits which I want to ask about, not traits specifically. Do you have any intention with the 300-second cooldown changes? Because there's quite a few in the game right now.
Sorry, was there more?
Well, basically, I want to know if there's, because acrobatics, there's quite a few on Thief. That's just my main. I know there's a few scattered around. They were originally changed to sort of alleviate problems. Is there sort of any plans to fix them, change them?
Yeah, so I can't speak a ton to like plans to change them because at the end of the day, the decision behind the 300-second cooldowns is that having these passive stun breaks or these passive invulns, passive evades, the mechanic is too problematic. It's just an unhealthy mechanic to have as something that's very available in PvP. So the goal of the 300-second cooldown trait was very much just to delete these traits. They just shouldn't be playable in competitive anymore. We don't want to see these mechanics, but we're not going to change the functionality right now because it's a much larger conversation that needs to happen. And I'm not saying that I'm sitting here cackling that, oh, haha, it's hilarious that we made all these traits unplayable, because it's not. It feels terrible to have a trait line like acro or a trait line like defense, which has like multiple slots that are just effectively empty. It does not feel good to someone trying to make a build, but the mechanic was problematic enough that we felt like it was the right change. And in terms of moving away from that functionality, it much becomes a larger discussion about, well, how does this, again, how do functional changes impact the whole game, and finding the right way to change these traits, and whether or not we actually want that passive defensive functionality to exist for, say, PvE. I think there's opportunity, potentially. I can't speak to it like with any definitive, like this is what's going to happen, but I think there is room to change those into more active defensive options, such that it's still relevant for PvE while not having the same problematic for PvP. It's just trait reworks end up being pretty involved process, and sometimes we'll even kind of evaluate the whole trait line anytime that we're looking at problematic traits like this. So it is kind of a larger project that has not really gone through the motions since the sledgehammer was dropped. But basically, like, as long as that functionality is on those traits, the cooldown will be exorbitantly large, because we just don't want them to be played. Which is an understandable, feels bad, but it feels like the correct decision for the game mode overall.
Makes sense. Okay. I think this is a good sort of opportunity to move on to, because you were talking about how the game to be played and PvP content. That is quite another chunky bit of topic to get through. Our beloved game mode as a whole. Grower, have you got? I know that there's certain things regarding matchmaking you like to talk about. This is.
We got a couple of questions that we actually talked about before this. So, our first one is definitely, could you explain a bit how the actual matchmaking system works in PvP? Basically, how you decide to match players together.
So there are a lot of factors, and I think we have like pseudocode on the wiki that largely it should be accurate as to at least how the matchmaker makes decisions. And I haven't looked at it recently, but it does give the general idea of like how, I believe, I need to double check honestly how the matchmaker specifically works. I believe it starts with an individual player, and it tries to form a match around that individual player, and it looks at everyone else in the queue and it says, okay, well, what factors, and there's a lot of factors that are then weighed in certain amounts. Like profession balance is something that the matchmaker considers. Rating is obviously the thing that matters the absolute most. We try to make a match that is closely balanced in terms of rating, but it does take into account a little bit like the number of games played, and that's weighed a little bit heavier in unranked to make sure that new players aren't just getting thrown into the deep end with players who've played thousands and thousands of games. That is relaxed quite a bit for the ranked matchmaker, just because there's an understanding of, all right, you already have to get to rank 20, which isn't a ton of games, but it's more important to balance off the skill rating at that point, because people are going to be more familiar with the game mode, and we just want to make the most balanced match possible. Like I said, profession balance is considered a little bit, and honestly, a pretty reasonable amount in terms of trying to avoid duplicate professions. It's only as effective as it can be, though, because players can swap after the match is created, but before the match starts. So it can't really enforce that, but it does try. And I mean, that's kind of the gist of it. I don't have all the super technical details about the matchmaker, but
So I've got
you can read more about it on the wiki if you're super interested.
The one question is, how does, you said the balance is the rating? Is that, so does it try and get all the players in plat, or does it go, okay, both teams are going to have a gold or so? Because that's sort of a common thing where you get a random low rating player mixed in with a game. That's from a personal experience.
So the first thing it does is that it assembles the players for the match first. It just grabs 10 arbitrary. It grabs the 10 players, and then it sorts them into teams after that. So it's not the case that it's like trying to form two separate teams at once, and then it sucks because at the end we just had to pick up a low-ranked player for whatever reason, like the queue time is too long or whatever, right? It's those players are picked up due to queue length, and queue length is the big thing that causes the matchmaker to kind of expand beyond every time interval. It will kind of expand its rating search a little bit wider and a little bit wider and a little bit wider. So once you get to like 5 to 10 minutes in queue, it is really just trying to make your match, because it would suck to wait 30 minutes to make a match. That would just be a miserable experience. So there is some give and take between queue time and perfect rating balance, but it will assemble the players first and then balance them into teams based off of rating and profession.
Okay. Yeah, because I know myself and Crayola, you'll agree with this, Crayola, is we find it quite often where, I don't know how, higher ranked players might have this experience where you'll get sort of that low ranked player quite common, and we find it more, I don't know if it's down to player population being the problem. It's Crayola,
yeah, I mean,
expand on that as well. Crayola?
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that? Because it is a big comment fault where you get the low rank player quite commonly. Is that just down to queue time, do you think? CMC? Sorry, we've got bring it on CMC. Yeah, sorry, it's been confusing there. I think.
Yeah, that's fine. It is really about queue time, and like that. So that case happens more frequently depending on what time of day you play, just because the number of players who are in the queue at any particular time is going to affect like how long your match takes to create. And that's not necessarily how long you've been in queue, but it also matters like how long everyone else has been in queue, right? So like there's no guarantee that you being in the queue for a minute means you're never going to get a player like that, because you might be getting pulled into a match that has been forming for many minutes already, and you are just the best possible case now. But earlier we found we had to pull in this other player because there just wasn't anyone else available at the time.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to really experience, because like sometimes, like I said, sometimes you will be in the queue for a short amount of time but still be in this match with a lower ranked player, and it's just like, why did this happen? But it's because there are 9 other people in this match, right? So the matchmaker isn't specifically looking at you. Sometimes the matchmaker is specifically looking at you, but more often than not is not.
Okay. Yeah, because that is probably my biggest gripe, where we're playing and you get that one dude running into a 1v5, and I swear it happens more regular than I care to admit. I think I've just got a cursed account. That's the problem. Where it's just quite common where I'll stealth a team up and you just get that. It's always a necro, actually. I'm going to pin it on the necro players here, where you just see them beelining it through stealth and just straight towards mid node, and they die. Yeah, you know what I mean. It's very frustrating.
I've played many hours of solo queue, so
it's
get the sentiment. So another component of this is that the matchmaker is only as good as the rating system is accurate, right? Like it is evaluating players based off their skill rating.
Mm-hmm.
But it's possible for a player who is maybe lower skilled to go on a win streak and, kind of break out of their normal rating bracket. Like a mid-tier gold player can win 5-6 games in a row. Suddenly they're in plat, and it's like, okay, the matchmaker is going to evaluate them as a platinum player, but either they were just playing really well for a long period of time, or they got maybe a little lucky with their matchmaking, their teammates versus the opponent's teammates, that they're now being kind of paired above their skill level, and they're actually going to play like in the game. They're going to play below what the matchmaker thinks they're expected to do. So that can also create these cases of, well, this player who's running in 1v5 is actually 1500 rating, but usually they're more of like a 13 to 1400 player, but they've just, they've gone on a streak. And something we've talked about, I'm sure Ben P has talked about this before as well, of like displaying the rating of players in the match after the match and showing here are the ratings of what the matchmaker was looking at when it made this match, just to give a little bit more visibility. Because having looked at this data before, I will say a lot of the time the matchmaker is pretty good at getting the ratings close. And I'm not saying that these cases don't exist where you have just someone who shouldn't be in the match at all, but I do think a lot more cases of this player is playing poorly is more this player is actually just playing poorly, and it's not that they got pulled into a match they aren't actually like suited for. It's just they're having a bad game, right? And like displaying that information to players so that they can see that and not be like, oh, matchmaker sucks, even though sometimes the matchmaker does have its own problems. And you can see that a lot more when like the cases where you win a game and win like +3 rating. It's because that is a very, very evident that players in the match were significantly lower rated than you are. But a lot of the time, the rating is pretty close. And players are human, right? We're always going to play. Not going to play at exactly our skill rating level every single game, because that's just not how the world works.
I don't know. Have you ever watched boys play? That guy is just switching through classes for fun and steamrolling.
I think that's kind of one of the things that differentiates top players compared to kind of the tier below is just the consistency.
It really, I hate watching his stream so much.
High plat players do have the capacity to play at Boyce's level. They just do it significantly less often.
Yeah.
So,
Boyce, if you're listening, when I say I hate watching you play, it means because of out of jealousy.
We all like watching him play. Well, I have a question. I know Sneaks is going to ask a question right now, but one before that regarding rating. I've always wondered, does the game take into account your games played and your ratio of win-loss up until now? Like, on the way it judges your rating in this given season now?
So the matchmaker does consider games played a little bit. Or are you talking about, like, is this in terms of the matchmaker or just the rating system?
Rating system.
Okay, so yeah, so we use like a Glico2 variant. So there is the concept of like rating volatility and rating deviation, and the more games you play, the more confident in your rating the system can become. So like at the start of the season, and anyone who's like monitored their rating through the API, you can see during placement games you're getting like +100, -100, +60, -60, like these large rating swings, because at the start of the season we reset the deviation, which means the rating system is not as confident that your rating is accurate. It says, all right, we're a little bit more uncertain, and it's going to make larger adjustments because it just doesn't really believe that you are the rating you are yet. But the more games you play within a season, that number constantly decrements. And it gets to a certain point where the rating system is more confident. Okay, this player is most likely to be plus or minus some amount from where he is currently, so we can make smaller adjustments to the rating here.
So it's
we can tune this. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
Okay, sorry. I was going to say that we can tune this a little bit as to like how low or how high it goes, and this is something that we haven't done recently, but historically this is something that has been kind of tweaked and tuned of how low that deviation value should actually clamp at as the minimum, just to make sure that, because we could get it to a point where you always got like +2 or -2 because the system was so confident after 200 games, but that's just really doesn't feel good as a player to see that lack of movement. So it does kind of stabilize a little bit higher, just so there is more ability to move in tiers. But it is possible to tune that number. hasn't been touched for a while at this point.
Yeah.
So,
Does the system ever look at your total games played? Like even when it's completely unsure of your, let's say maybe when it's completely unsure of your rating when it's stripped. Let's say if I would have maybe, I don't know, 5,000 unranked games or like a mixture of ranked and unranked solo queue games, and my win-loss ratio would be about 50%, give or take.
Sure.
Would the
So
system look at that?
The rating system resets with every season. We do a soft reset, which means that you go halfway back to the average rating. So if you're like an 1,800 player and the average rating is 1,200, your very first game of the next season you are queuing as a 1,500 rating, and then we reset the deviation to its maximum value. So that does not consider your history at all. The matchmaker does consider it a little bit, and like I said earlier, it considers it a lot more heavily in unranked, but there is a little bit. And honestly, it might be 0 at this point in terms of how it considers number of games played for the ranked matchmaker specifically, but the rating system does not care. It resets kind of fully every season.
okay, I'm just gonna sort of put in here. There's the thing that you mentioned that it resets every season. Personally, I'm not a big fan of, because you go through your placements and things. I'd like to just, this is going to be more of my personal little opinion time. I'd like to see it sort of look at where you finished last season, because my I suppose it does in a little bit. It goes, how can I put this? My first time I kind of came into PvP, I got placed in Silver 2. I went down to Silver 1. I climbed all the way to like the top of Gold 3, like one game from Plat. And it felt quite demoralizing sort of after the placements to end up the season after back into like Gold 1, but now I'm quite happy where I am. But it took a lot of like, it's quite demoralizing looking back on the way you were the last season. You finished quite high to get placed lower, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there is a balance. Like I said, we currently bring you halfway back to the mean. Like we don't do a full. The alternative is that we could just do a hard rating reset and say everyone is now 1,200 at the start of the season, which creates way more problems than it's worth, because then you have legendary players playing as bronze players, which sucks a lot. So we do. I mean, so it does consider a little bit where you finished, in that if you finish 1,500, you start the season at 1,350 or whatever.
Okay.
But obviously the volatility or the deviation is high enough within placement games that if you do have a poor performance over your placement games, you are going to place lower and then have to kind of climb back up.
So is that the short out saying that the placement games are incredibly important and you should try hard as much as possible?
In the short term, it's true, but anyone who's had a bad run in placements, like personally, I somehow managed to go 0-3 in placements literally every season, and then like ended up, usually like qualify into gold because losing the first 3 games hurts so heavily, but over the course of a season, if you play enough, you're going to climb back up to your true rating and like always finish in higher plat or whatever.
Awesome.
And I mean, we've talked about there's the possibility to relax it a little bit more, but I think we do want the seasons to feel at least a little bit distinct from each other, because we could just do no reset at all. Which is probably just about as bad as doing a full hard reset.
Because then you don't have the enjoyment of a win, of a climb, because you're just going to be in that sort of stagnant spot.
Yeah, like if all legend players just started a legend again, well, it creates some matchmaker problems because, well, not really, because it'll just be the same as the end of the season anyway, but it kind of blurs the lines between what is this season compared to last season, because everyone's just at the same rating they were. So we do want to kind of have a little bit of movement at the start.
Okay, I'd never even
considered that. This is season 22. Maybe there's a new balance patch, and all the people at the top were all carried by their build, which is obviously not true. The top players are generally very, very good, and we'll get there regardless of the meta. But
you do see
some people are like more heavily reliant on certain builds, and as their build gets nerfed, they will fall. So, taking some confidence away from their rating value at the start of the season makes sense.
I'm going to quote Andreas when Guard was at its height, and he said, "Without Guard being how it is, I would be like, I wouldn't even be rated." Which, yeah, is for the one trick ponies like myself and a few others. It's nice to have out there building the meta. But I'm going to hit you with a bit of a hardball question here, CMC. Oh yeah. What is there a site of a long-term goal with PvP or anything like? Is there a direction or an aim sort of with the team? Could you sort of talk? Because at the moment, content for PvP it seems lacking as such. There's not. It's just the one really sort of game mode of being conquest. Is there an aim or a direction that you go, I want to push it towards this side? Is there any sort of anything like that happening?
Sure. I will say, like, for PvP specifically, balance is a very, very good form of content, because as balance changes, the way you interact with players, which is the core component of PvP, changes. So it's like a balance patch, like a good heavy balance patch, is a content patch for PvP. That's not to say that we should only focus on balance, and we've done a bit of experimenting with alternate game modes through like the mini seasons, and recently we had the tournament week where we tried out, like, got the TDM modes. We got stronghold tournaments running. It was crazy. People like the change of pace, and stronghold has its own problems, but we definitely think it's worthwhile in the mini seasons. Like, giving alternatives to conquest it's a nice change of pace. I think conquest has always been the main game mode for PvP, and for the foreseeable future, it probably will continue to be. There's no reason that in the future this could change, and it's like, well, suddenly everyone determined that 3v3 is the best game mode, and everyone just wants to play 3v3 all the time. Well, maybe we shift 3v3, and this is just super hypothetical. I'm just going to preface this with a million hypotheticals, because I'm not saying this is likely to ever happen, but if there was a huge player response, like 3v3 is the best format, it should just be, it's better than conquest for these reasons, and it's completely true, and we want 3v3 to be the main supported game mode, I think that's something that we'd really need to consider. And I mean, I think conquest has a lot more depth than some of the TDM modes, which is why it's kind of existed for so long and kind of maintained just interesting gameplay throughout the mode. But like, supporting alternate game modes, we're mostly just in the mini season idea right now, and whether or not we actually have the player base to support a always on queue for those modes is something that we look at a lot. We look at data and see, like, who are the players that are playing during the mini seasons, who are the players that are playing during tournament week. Are these a distinct player group that are not going to cannibalize the conquest queue if this queue existed? I mean, there's just a lot more data to gather before a concrete decision is made to commit to something like that, but it is definitely something that we think about.
Yeah, because it's a really common thing I was going to bring up. You've kind of answered the question before with the 3v3 and 2v2s. It's a lot of people like them. I know personally, I loved tournament week. I didn't have a chance to partake in one of the stronghold tournaments, but it was a bit of a laugh and a fresh air. I think this sort of thing needs to happen more often, and I would quite like the 3v3, because it kind of incorporates a bit of team play, even just as an unranked. It was just a chill out mode where you just go in and butt heads would be pretty fun, and I think it would be welcomed with the community rather than just having a ranked version.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same problem though. Like, even if it's just an unranked versus ranked, if it's like players actually just want to play 3v3 instead of conquest, and it's now available at the same time as conquest, then it does still take some player base away.
Would you
which
not?
Has always been the major concern of, like, why there is only one main game mode.
Would it not? Yeah, sorry. Would it not sort of encourage other players to come over to it with more choice? Because if there's more choice, it would I don't know if that would be a pro or a con. I suppose that's the data side, but.
So I mean, more choice is always good, but the concern is that, I mean, we literally just talked about matchmaker complaints, right? And the fewer people who are queuing for conquest means the matchmaker is going to struggle even more, and that's the major concern, is that more options are interesting, but can we actually support having more options without negatively impacting everyone? Because, like, there would be some number of people who went to play 3v3, but then people are also playing Conquest, so the 3v3 queue is less optimal than it could be. And I mean, this is just like the conversation that happens around what queues should be active at any given time. But stuff like tournament week, I think it went over really well, and we saw a lot of people pretty excited by that. And I mean, we'd love to do it more often. Something that we've talked about previously, I'll just bring it up again, is having like on the weekends that the monthly tournament does not run, which it is actually running right now, or whatever. Having a 2v2 monthly or a 3v3 monthly, like what if last weekend, the Saturday, we had a 3v3 tournament, and so essentially once a month we'd have a 3v3 tournament, once a month we'd have a 2v2 tournament, once a month we'd have a stronghold tournament. Seems awesome. Like, it's definitely on our radar of just trying to get that going. I think we do have a couple things to iron out in terms of the deathmatch modes before really pushing that. I mean, we've seen a lot of problems recently with players who are, like teleporting out of the map, and well, they just can't die, and the game mode is terrible. So are actively looking into a way to kind of mitigate that, in addition to, like, I mean, actioning those accounts and doing cheats. We talked to CS about these players and try to get the right investigations going. But I mean, just making it so that if you go outside the playable space, you just die because you should not get there legitimately makes a lot of sense, and hopefully could clean up the game mode a little bit before we try to do something a little bit more prestigious as a 3v3 monthly. And I mean, they won't have anything super unique, cool like the gizmos, but we could have like a unique title or like more exciting rewards than the common dailies. Just get, again, more opportunity to play those modes, because I think people do like them in smaller doses. Like the first 2v2 mini season that we ran was a month long, and I think it kind of dragged on at the end. And some of this was balance related, but the TDM modes are always going to have balance problems more than Conquest, just because you don't explicitly balance for those modes. So I think a lot of the time people just like to jump in, play these for a little bit of time, palate cleanser, nice change of pace. But long term, maybe they aren't as deep as Conquest, so they do kind of fall off for being the main game mode.
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't need to be the main game mode, but it's perfect having them in like that.
As you said, a palate cleanser. It is. I do like it. I've got quite another sort of hot topic conversation in regards to like the PvP content sort of side of things, which is what the in ranked games you might have experienced this yourself, is sort of players AFKing or win. Like, I'm not going to say anything other than that, but like win trade and quite blatant throwing on the side of rating. Like, I've experienced it. I think everybody who's played ranked has experienced it, where they lose the first team fight, I'm not playing the rest of the game, or blatantly sort of, it seems daft, but they're making mistakes on purpose, like rotating into 1v5s consistently. Is there any way to, I'm not going to say discourage because that's the wrong play, encourage players to play the full match, so then players don't lose? So it's quite demoralizing when it's a 4v5 and you lose 30 rating and you're like, what more could I do? Is there anything we can...
I mean, so I think it is very difficult to punch through that kind of like that defeatist idea of, oh, we lost the first team fight, the game's over. Like, when someone gets into that mindset, it is very difficult to bring them back. I mean, obviously it's just an incorrect mindset, because
it's not a good way to live.
Guild Wars 2 PvP specifically, like if you're down 499-0, you have the same chance of winning the game as when you were to 0-0, because just cap all the points, win all your fights, and you can still win the game. So it's not like you're getting snowballed out because they won the early game and scaled super high, right? Like in a MOBA, you would see that case where you just feel like you can never win because you are so far behind in levels or items or whatever. That's never actually the case in Guild Wars 2. So you should always be trying to, how do we come back in this game? But obviously, like, you can't really speak into someone's mind, and like if someone has that attitude after the first team fight, it is hard to pull them out of it.
It's more it's more with the demoralizing for sort of the players who experience it. Is there anything to encourage the players though to go play the full game? You won't lose as much, or even, it sounds daft, punish. I'm going to actually say it, punish the AFKers. I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, punishing the AFKers is definitely the more realistic direction, I think, because, I mean, like I said, I think it's difficult to prevent people from getting into that mindset. But if you are AFK, if you are not participating in the game, that is something. Obviously, if you disconnect, we do action through dishonor, but trying to get a more comprehensive system so that if you're always AFKing and spawn, or doing things, it's very difficult getting into kind of the minutia of the game of, right, like if you are running to far point and always losing your fight, is that someone who is just trying to dodge the AFK kick, or are they just making maybe not necessarily even a bad play, they're trying to go win that fight and they just can't win. Trying to differentiate between those two options is a lot difficult to do as an automated system.
Yes,
but we have talked internally about looking to ways to better identify like AFK players who are just trying to exist in the match and dodge the AFK kick, because if you do actually get AFK kicked, then we do have the rating mitigation. You don't lose rating if you had a player who legitimately disconnected from the game. And it's just, it doesn't fully grasp the idea of this player who is still in the match but is not participating, and it doesn't identify that as you should not lose rating here.
Okay. Yeah, it's just one thing that I've sort of experienced, and it is quite frustrating. So,
yeah,
I've got to ask the question, and I know another one which I often see on the forums. I'm not going to ask for specifics here because I'm hacking in sort of Guild Wars 2. When you do come across hackers, obviously you guys will have a cheat system. I'm not going to ask about that because it's an obvious. You can't talk about that one. What sort of is the process? How can people deal with hackers that they come across? Is it just a case of reporting? And because there are reports on, I just read the forums and people go, I've seen this guy several times and it hasn't been actioned. Is there anything behind the scenes you could share on that sort of topic?
So I can't really go too deep into details with how CS is dealing with these cases, but we do talk to them a lot about reports that we get from players, and obviously, like, reporting in game does actually do something. Whether or not it's kind of feels like it goes off into the ether, right, when you do it as a player. But we do see these reports. We do see players who communicate either through forums or Discord reporting players like this, and we do have conversations with the CS team of like, what are we going to do about these things? I mean, I can't really go too deep.
I understand, because obviously, like our work inside.
We do see a lot of reports about hackers, and we do go through the motions of trying to do something about it.
It's more done in the shadows.
Sometimes it takes time, and sometimes it's less. It's obviously always going to be less visible. Like, the end result is you don't see this player again, but you never really understand, like, the idea of I never see this player anymore doesn't really register, right? You'll always just see the people who continue to do that.
You'll only see the bad things, never the good.
So even when action is taken, it is kind of invisible.
I still
Honestly,
recall.
I think it is.
I still recall the hacker who got banned on YouTube, which I remember hitting the news, the headlines. That is still my favourite. That should be done more often. Publicised getting killed in Divinity's Reach. Still enjoyed that personally. But I'm gonna reminisce again and pull back to my Guild Wars 1 days here. CMC. I'm a fanboy. Okay. This is the one thing that I said straight away, I think, when me and you met, Krill, and we've talked about PvP, is spectating.
Yeah, most definitely.
I introduced Crayola to this and it kind of blew his mind. Back in Guild Wars 1, you can press spectate and you can go view matches, like high-ranked PvP or GVG games, high-ranked Heroes Ascent games.
Yes.
Yeah, you'll be familiar with. In Guild Wars 2, for me to sort of view a game in that theater mode, I just can't do it. I can't. The only way to view a game is by, being an Arenanet partner, which isn't an option for 99% of the player base. I don't know. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but would or could that? Or is there any technical limitations preventing that being implemented?
So in terms of doing something like the Guild Wars 1 observer mode, it is very much a technical limitation. Like Guild Wars 1 observer mode, actually, when you spectated a match, it was on a delay, right? Like it wasn't even you're live in this match. It is you can either rewatch an old match, or when you actually watched a quote unquote live match, it was delayed by some amount.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that is much more difficult to do in the framework of Guild Wars 2, but we do have the live spectating option that, as you said, is currently available to partners. There is some limitation to the number of players that we can have in an active match, which is definitely one of the reasons why it is not opened up to the entire player base, because we can't actually, depending on the number of people who would be interested in spectating at a given time, we can't actually put that many people into a PvP match.
How many people can go into a PvP match?
I don't remember the number off the top of my head.
I think it's 20. Is it the same as what a normal private arena would be, with 25 or something?
It might be set to the same value. It might be. I don't know. I don't want to say one way or the other because I don't know. But it may be similar to that 25 value.
Matches in the in-houses, our experience is that there should be more slots, definitely, so the more players could fit in to play.
Yeah, and I don't know the exact reason behind how that number was determined, because that was set long time ago at this point. I'm assuming there was some technical reason why 25 was selected as the custom arena cap, but I could not tell you why that is.
I'd imagine you'd have to go digging through a mountain of code to find out why.
Yeah, I mean there might be someone around that I could ask.
But it's definitely something that I would personally like to see. Obviously, there's technical limitations. I think it would be nice that players, because there's not much in game. I think we've talked about this pre-podcast, is where we talked about that the game does a pretty poor job of teaching players the game and the sort of mechanics. It sounds bad because you can do a meta event by auto attacking. I would like to be able to go into and sort of go, right, I want to watch a top end thief and see how he plays in an AT or like the monthly, and go, okay, I'll go watch and Sind, and you can rewatch that. I think on top of that, it would sort of promote team play, because you could go, I'm going to go rewatch Rank 55 or Worms, and then come up with a strat, and at the same time they're going to be coming up watching your gameplay. It's a good learning opportunity, personally, I think, for players.
Absolutely. Like I totally agree. Again, I mean, like I said, doing the Guild Wars 1 style observer mode is definitely not super realistic within Guild Wars 2.
Well,
that's going to be me going to bed crying tonight then.
No. That could maybe be implemented, no?
It's more
not in the scope of Guild Wars 2, but I mean, our questions here basically stem from our ideas on what we want to see for our own enjoyment of the game, and what the community's been saying as a whole about this, right? So,
right. No, I mean, we get the feedback of like, why can't I as a player watch ATs? Like, we see that all the time, right? And
it's just down to technical limitations, really. As much as we hate the answer. Well, it answers the question, to be honest. No, it's technically too hard. But
I'm not here to make people happy with every answer, unfortunately.
That's yeah.
For sure.
As much as I would like for every answer to be, oh yeah, we could totally do everything that you want, right? Like, that's unfortunately not the case. But I feel like just having the information is valuable. So,
well, for sure. Well, I mean, we're kind of closing out on the questions we have right now, but for sure, this is a very important, one of the important steps, or like in actually communicating with the player base. Even this kind of platform that we're trying to provide as the players, we're really grateful that you come on and talk about this, because it's really good and really important to have this communication going. If you're a devoted player who likes to play and wants to compete, you want stuff to know stuff. You want to hear it from a developer. You want thoughts on it. You want to see what's possible, what's not possible, what's maybe, you know, there's all this content regarding communication, just talking word, that a lot of players are missing out on somehow, that are just not a part of this whole scene, let's say. And I think it's really cool if we somehow can reach to more PvP players and get more people involved in this communication, so that the overall knowledge of the player base grows and we are able to see more and better Goers 2 PvP.
Yeah, beautifully put there, Corolla. Communication is key. Even if it's a bad news, I'd rather hear it, CMC, personally. So if you tell me Thief's getting nerfed,
agree, for sure.
even if you tell me Thief's getting nerfed, I'll hate it, but at least you've told me. But yeah, like Corolla said there, we're wrapping up the questions now. We've covered, like, just looking at the time, we're like over 2 hours in. It has been a pleasure sort of getting you on the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on and agreeing to sort of let the forums ask some of their questions. It's opened up the floodgates for it.
No, it's super fun. I mean, like I said before, I just really enjoy talking about Guild Wars 2. So I'm happy to be here. Love to do it again sometime for sure. Whether or not
we're definitely doing it again if you want to.
We'll have to figure out like scheduling and whatnot. But big fan. I think it was super fun.
Indeed. And yeah, basically, thank you for coming out. I do not envy your inbox after this goes live, because your Discord is about to be full.
No, that's fine. I'll just have a bunch more unread messages until I get to them. So,
well, I think that's a perfect opportunity to sort of wrap things up for those who have kind of listened. Hopefully, you've got some answers, some of your questions. Yeah. So some of your questions answered. We've tried to condense all the big topics, which CMC has very kindly answered and agreed to come on, and which has been brilliant. So,
you know what, we can do we can do a last segment. Is there anything that you would specifically like to say, CMC?
Anything? Wow, you just can put me on the spot like that. Let's see. If I had anything to say, I would, and then this goes to you guys as well as just all of the community. Like, I think just having the strong bond of the Guild Wars 2 community, whether it's PvP or across the game, obviously this matters more about PvP. Like, the Guild Wars 2 PvP community is awesome, and as someone who was kind of a larger component of that in the past on the player side, like, we've always just been driving together. Everyone, and I mean, we hit speed bumps or we go off the road sometimes. I truly believe that all of the dedicated players to Guild Wars 2 PvP, we just want to see the game in the best state possible, and we want to constantly improve the game that we just all love playing, right? And you guys here doing this podcast, all the content creators out there who stream PvP or whatever, right? Like, growing the competitive community within Guild Wars 2 is just super cool. I love to see it. I love to get involved where I can. So anyone, you guys, or anyone out there who's trying to do community stuff like this, definitely feel free to reach out to me with the same kind of preface that sometimes I just don't have enough hours in the day, but my goal is the same as like all of the players, and the reason why I kind of am in the position that I am today is because I've always just been moving forward with the goal of making competitive Guild Wars 2 the best that it can be. And so I'd like to thank everyone in the community who shares that goal and tries to do everything that they can as well. It's really it's a great experience from both the player and developer side now to just kind of see our community push forward.
Awesome. Right. And on that note, I hope that we get to see everyone in the arena now, all hyped about this. So I've been Sneakers. Crayola has been here as well. And thank you again, CMC, for coming on the show. Stay competitive, and we'll see you all in the arena.